can of Varsol is not going to freeze.
Even carpets without VOCs.
If there are natural fibers, cotton, all wool carpets, they are available. Actually, if you go to CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation's website, they have a lot of information in that, and there's things, Canada Choice, for instance, they actually designate things that don't off-gas. You know, I don't think any of us in looking at what's currently available in terms of building materials and so on are going to be able to get zero emissions in our house. But we can get less. For instance, we might have to keep the paint in the basement because it'll freeze, but we can put the paint thinner in the garage because it won't freeze. So, you know, it'll be a balance. But basically, think about this and do the best that you can.
Looking at laminate floors, best to go with a European manufacturer versus, say, a Chinese, because I know the Europeans have much tighter VOC levels. I don't know if that's necessarily...
The only thing I've actually heard is getting it pre-finished. Usually with the glues that hold it together, it's either phenol or urea formaldehyde, and the phenol is better. If you, for instance, with plywood, if you go with exterior grade, it actually off-gas less than interior grade because it uses phenol formaldehyde rather than urea. But for most, if you're using pre-finished products, they tend to be fairly good. At least that's what I've heard. Simon talked quite a bit about this. When you're looking at what you're going to be doing to your house, you have to think long term. When you're buying windows, you never want to have to do that again. You probably don't even want to do it the first time. But there may come a time where you need windows, and this is the window that you're going to be living with for 25 years or perhaps even longer. So you have to think in terms of, you know, energy costs and energy availability and things like that, of how it's going to be in the future, not what it happens to be today. Same thing with furnaces. It looks like as of next year you will no longer be able to buy a mid-efficiency gas furnace in Ontario. The OEB looks like it's going to make that change. But 5 years ago, lots of people were putting them in. Now they have to live with them when they could have put in a high efficiency, but they saved a bit of money at the time, and now that energy prices are starting to get scary and so on, they have to live with this for another 10 years or more. So think long term. As I said, when I was framing early, it was R10 in the attic. Now it's R32, and most builders put in R40. Try and do it once and do it right the first time. Of the houses that we've audited, they get 8 to 20% of their energy via free solar. And that's just coming in the windows. That's not houses like have been designed by an architect so that they may get a whole lot more. That's just your average house, and in almost every case it's luck. It just so happened that when they plopped your house down on the lot, it happened to be looking south, and the original builder put a bunch of windows looking that way. But that does mean that if you have, and I actually did this, if you have a small window in your kitchen by your sink and that's facing south, you could replace that with a much larger window and get some additional free solar energy. So 8 to 20%, and that's just orientation and where the windows happen to fall out in the design of the house. As you know, with developers, they're usually looking at how many houses can we possibly fit in this area. They're not looking at how can we orient them so that they get more energy. And you want your deciduous trees south, east, and west so that they have no leaves in the winter when the sun comes in, and they have leaves in the summer when the sun is coming in mainly through the east and west, so your house will keep cool, and you want your conifers on the north and northwest and northeast so that they will break the wind. In fact, when we're testing houses for air leakage, one factor is how many holes are in it, but another factor is it sitting right there where that house is, or is it right on the top of a hill all by itself with no trees or anything around it? The same house with the same number of leaks, you put it into an area where it has no windbreak, it's obviously going to lose more heat through air leakage. So that's something you can do just as part of making your yard look good and comfortable. Particularly as cooling becomes an issue. Many of you are adults like me, and you remember when hardly anybody had any air conditioning, and now pretty well every new house that's built has central air, and a whole lot of other houses have central air, are getting it put in. So having the, I'm a house, I'm looking south, and in the winter the sun comes up like that and shines in my south windows. But in the summer it's higher and it comes up like this and shines in my east and west windows. So in the summer, if I can get some trees in front of my east and west windows, my need for air conditioning is going to go way down. House is a system. This is something that was developed in the 70s, and it's actually the application of engineering principles that are used for large buildings to houses. And it means that anytime you change the amount of heat, moisture, or air that a house has, it's going to affect the other two. I mentioned how houses built in the late 80s, they made them tighter. They suddenly had less airflow, but a whole lot more moisture. So you have to keep those things in perspective and make sure that if you do make your house a lot tighter, that your ventilation is adequate. If you change the temperature in rooms, then your moisture levels are going to change as well, often dramatically with horrible results. I'm now going to talk about where does the heat go. Heating is still our big energy use in houses. Air conditioning is starting to get bigger, but it's only, if we're lucky, 2 months where we really use it. But despite global warming, it still gets pretty cold in the winter around here. The biggest one of the 100,000 that we looked at is air leakage. Then the basement, main walls, windows and doors, and the attic. That's kind of the hierarchy of where your heat dollars are going. Interestingly enough, it's quite similar to the audit that was done on this building, I believe, that Simon talked about earlier. I think maybe air leakage and main walls were changed or something like that. When you're dealing with any of these areas, the building code is the worst house you're legally allowed to build. Okay? When they say, I've built it to code, that means I've done the worst job I'm legally allowed to do. So that's a good starting point with the code, and certainly things like fire code, gas code, electrical code, I'd want you all to follow those at all times. But for insulation and energy, the building code is the bottom. With air leakage, as I said, as you make your house tighter, you're going to need good mechanical ventilation and spot ventilation to control water. You want to seal the top of your house first. Houses tend to act like chimney. It's something that architects and other people call the stack effect. They act like chimneys. The warm air in your house rises up, wants to push out at the top, and suck back in at the bottom. It actually acts as a chimney. There's